Post-Eurovision depression is in full swing, or post-Eurovision relief, depending on your perspective. We're now 2 weeks out from the final of Eurovision 2026. That's given us an opportunity to take the time to review what happened and see who will be happy and who won't be after this year's outcome. For that reason, it's time for another tradition. It's this year's Eurovision winners and losers. Firstly, a quick word for the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. I've been traveling a lot during Eurovision season, and it was a lifesaver for me to be able to continue to watch the same series on Netflix or elsewhere as I have been at home, and access series that are available elsewhere but not in the UK. Each time we went abroad, I would enable Surfshark as soon as we arrived and just leave it running the entire time we were away. It was seamless and everything worked like it did back home. With Surfshark, you can quickly switch between 4,500 servers in 140 countries, so you've always got a fast and responsive connection. And they're high speed, so you won't have to deal with buffering either. Eurovision finally came to YouTube in the US this year, but for past years, you can use Surfshark to watch it on YouTube rather than it being locked behind the Peacock platform. And you can watch back any region-locked national finals by selecting the relevant country. Surfshark also has the added benefit of letting you use the internet without being legally required to hand your literal ID documents to random companies. And it protects your activity online from their prying eyes as well as everyone else's. With data companies and corporations gathering as much information as they possibly can about us, Surfshark gives you peace of mind by blocking ads and trackers, as well as keeping all of your web activity anonymous. I can't recommend Surfshark enough, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, there's no risk to you if you want to give it a try. Go to surfshark.com/ESCGabe or use code ESCGabe at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Now, let's start this video with a loser. That's me, and every other fan media outlet's predictions, every bookmaker, and just about every single accepted Eurovision norm. This was not a year that was in any way predictable, and as a result, pretty much the entire accepted logic of the contest up to this point has been totally thrown out the window. That in turn meant that I, as well as basically everyone else who was foolish enough to attempt to call which way the contest would end up going, got it completely wrong, with none of the pre-contest favourites getting within even 200 points of winning the thing. You could have gotten some pretty crazy odds on Bulgaria winning, with Romania also being in the top 3, and even crazier ones on Bulgaria winning the jury. Neither of those two countries even featured in my video last year trying to predict who the next first-time winner of the Eurovision Song Contest would be. Though in my defence, this is because I only included countries at that time where their projected chance of participating was above 50% according to this model, and Bulgaria and Romania had an only 16 and 34% projected chance respectively of participating at that time. The most logical question to ask then is, what happened and what does it mean for the contest in the future? I think what we saw was the combined effect of a few different factors. Dramatic underperformance by the favourites, Bulgaria dramatically exceeding expectations, and the changes to the juries that required the inclusion of 2 members under the age of 25. The first 2 will both get their own items here, so that last one is where I'm going to focus the attention for now, and then we'll piece together the rest of this picture over the course of the video. I don't think it's any coincidence that the juries ranked Bulgaria higher than expected when it was the most modern and current pop song, combined with the actual level of the performance being very high. We don't know for sure which jurors are under 25 because the jury rankings are kept semi-anonymous. We get the numbers and we get the names of the jurors, but we don't have them attached to each other. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if the average ranking for Bulgaria was closer to first place for the under 25 jurors than it was for the older. At the same time, the results clearly show that this had very, very broad appeal. So it would have done pretty well even if this system hadn't changed. The other thing that's worth stressing here is that while Dara did win the jury, it wasn't a runaway winner by any stretch. That win came amongst the most spread voting that we've ever seen at the contest. 204 points wouldn't have won you the jury or gotten you particularly close in any year since 2016 when the new voting system was introduced. As for the public, I think the reasons they confounded expectations were multifaceted. Again though, we should save some of this for when I talk about Bulgaria later, as we will naturally be doing, so I'm going to hold fire on this for now. I mentioned Romania before, so it only feels fitting to talk about them as part of this next section. Our first winner of this video is anyone from a country that speaks Romanian, that is Romania and Moldova. We're going to put aside for a moment that this show resulted in a diplomatic incident between the two countries because the Moldovan jury didn't give Romania enough points. I can't remember a time before where the director of a broadcaster had to resign because their jury failed to give a country 12 points, but it's become very apparent to me that this is a geopolitical third rail that I don't think I should touch. Neither Romania nor Moldova participated in Eurovision last year, and neither had seen the final of the competition since 2023 in Moldova's case and 2022 in Romania's. That changed in a big way this year, and between the two of them, they scored 522 points, 415 of which came from the public. Given that these two are drawing a lot from the same diaspora communities, imagine if one of them wasn't participating or if one of them had been really shit. The other one might well have ended up with 300 or more from the public alone. These results were completely deserved, and an expected consequence of starting out with some good songs and staging them perfectly. Satoshi's performance was raucous and it was full of joy, and it focused on elements that made it stand out. Satoshi and his team's charisma were an example of this, with the kind of fresh glass of water or tonic of Aliona Moon's really clean vocals, and the fact that something like this needed to generally feel a little loose and not overly orchestrated. Meanwhile, Alexandra Capitanescu from Romania delivered something that was far beyond her years. The way in which she emoted this song as well as singing it clearly made a huge difference. Every time she nailed a piercing stare into the camera, another 25 points hurried her way. This was a staging and a song that put huge pressure on her because it was so demanding. She easily met the standard though. Had the juries not pushed this one down as hard as they did, we might have seen a Bulgaria and Romania split screen, which I suspect we would have all preferred to what we actually got. Hopefully these results will have major positive effects overall. Moldova's big national final upgrade will hopefully stick. And money-wise, I think that is possible because all of the sponsors they had for that were local. It was the local arena and the biggest bank in the country. As for Romania, their national final was not the best in quality, but this result should hopefully at least keep them interested and demonstrate to bigger artists in the country that there is a lot of success that can come from being part of the contest. Romania's pop industry has punched above its weight in Europe before, and I'd love to see that again through the prism of this contest. While Romania and Moldova overachieved, our next losers are the ones who did the opposite, the pre-show big jury favourites. Each performed well and each still received a pretty creditable score and result. But given that our presumed ceiling for these songs was that they could win, and there were definitely hopes in each of these camps that that would indeed come true, there's reasons for some level of measured disappointment in each case. Each of Denmark, Australia, Finland and France underachieved for different reasons, so we're going to go through them. The first thing though does apply to all of them, and that's that the jury simply couldn't make up their minds. It's striking how close all of these songs were together, with 165, 165 again, 144 and 141 points respectively. If everyone is jammed in the door trying to appeal to the same people and trying to claim that jury victory, it's no wonder that an outsider like Dara with massive televote potential can stroll past all of them and win easily. It wasn't just these songs in this group either. Italy and Poland scored 134 and 133 respectively too. And with the exception of Italy, every single one of these songs did better with the juries than they did with the public. You had 14 sets of 12 awarded to these songs in total, but none of them got more than 4 each. There's been a few theories knocking around about this, but in my opinion, a lot of it comes down to the fact that none of these managed to distinctly distinguish themselves above the rest in the way that Bulgaria did. Bulgaria might not have been seen as jury friendly, but they had such a slick and professional package that we'll talk about later that it meant that it nonetheless stood out when you had lots of other things competing for their attention. Firstly, with Denmark, I feel like at least part of the reason is that they had a poor running order slot. Winning from first would have always been difficult, and while they still made the best of it and did really well on the jury side, that was always going to cause them a big problem. I do also wonder whether competing for voters who are looking for pop music may have meant that Bulgaria actually became quite a big problem for the Danes, and in turn, people who might have been inclined to vote for Søren ended up voting for Dara instead. For Australia, despite Delta Goodrem being a world-class performer and singer and standing out in this way so much from a lot of the field, this maybe goes to show that you can only elevate a song so far. This was very conventional, it was a little outdated and a bit too cliche, and it was maybe just too schmaltzy for a Eurovision winner in 2026. Think of it like a gymnastics score. The execution may have been perfect, but the difficulty level was too low. Delta Goodrem could have sung almost anything into the top 10, but without some kind of underlying relevance, or some way to get the audience on board with you, you're never going to break out of that chasing group that it ultimately formed a part of. For Finland, I remember clearly how I felt after the national selection. The concept with the duet between the violin and the vocal, and the confessional booth / orchestra pit set, did feel like a concept that could win, but it just felt ever so slightly elevated away from the viewer. And we didn't feel, most crucially, that we were an active participant in this performance. It did have soul and it did have love poured into it for sure, and Linda Lampenius has a crazy amount of charisma that really elevated this. But it was so dark and so broody that you very much felt the screen that sat between us and the performance. I think that lack of connection, that lack of feeling involved in the performance performance just took some of the edge off the score. And as a result, people turned to things that did make them feel something, like Romania, like Moldova, and like Bulgaria. For France, the problem is the same, but much, much worse. France did terribly with the televote, securing only 14 points in that part of the voting, and as a result, not getting close to anyone else here. Monroe is a fantastic singer, but the performance felt like she was just part of a machine. There was no space here for any kind of personality. It was a hard-edged, technical demonstration of what a Eurovision winner should look like in the eyes of the French team. And after several entries of a similar vibe from France, the rest of Europe has had a fair amount of training on how to sniff this out. They should have built a song and a performance that focused on her having a blast on stage. This would have translated so much better to the screen, given that the storyteller here is a precociously talented, very young singer just starting out in her career. Her charisma would have felt so much clearer to the viewer, and we would have connected with it so much more if there was a certain carefree nature to the way she was hitting all of these crazy notes. Instead, it felt like so much of her was locked away, out of reach, and we never got to see it. It was ultimately no great surprise then that the public wasn't won over. Another loser, but only in the broadest sense of the word, and only given the extremely high hopes and expectations for this, was unfortunately Greece. And before any Greeks watching get disheartened, don't worry, it's not that this wasn't a great performance in my opinion, I think it really was. But we have to be honest. Was a 10th placed finish for this on any of our minds before Eurovision week? The answer is no. And did the staging focus sufficiently on the things that made this song great? Also no. There are certain factors out of Greece's control that contributed to this result. The televote potential of this was nullified a lot by the success of Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria. Plus, Israel's non-organic political voting campaigns continue to take 200 points or more off the table before end note is sung. For that reason, an element of this result can be explained by the natural squeezing that occurs, bearing in mind all of these factors. The thing is, we knew a lot of these televote results were coming before Eurovision week. And to be frank, I thought that Greece would clear a lot of these hurdles anyway. After rehearsals, bets started flying in on Greece winning the entire thing, with the implied chance of winning, as a result, briefly climbing above 20%. Everything seemed to be going to plan, until this had contact with the public on Tuesday night in the semi-final. Then the numbers started moving backwards, and we ended up seeing ultimately that it only finished 7th in that show. A lot of people look fondly back to the first release video of Feto, which was simply Akilas standing in a room with a microphone with 100% of the attention on him. The only thing carrying the song there visually was his raw charisma and nothing else. That was part of what helped drive this into contention. The staging at Eurovision, though, didn't really feel like it was about him. There was so much going on everywhere all the time that we didn't quite know where to look. In doing so, the performance undermined its own biggest asset, which was Akilas himself. He still sold this well, but I've lost count of the number of critiques that I've seen that said that the staging was too much, that it became difficult to follow, or that it was just way too over the top. For my personal taste, I love the ridiculous maximalism of this, and in some way it meets the song's message well about consumerism. But stepping back from my own feelings, it is pretty clear to see why people feel this way about it. If this was being done from the start again, I'd hope that the first thing that would be done would be to strip everything right back and say, what made this song so appealing in the first place? Akilas showed up and he did his job to the maximum, but the machine around him didn't deliver in the same way. One thing I will say though, it is ironic and in some ways fitting that a song about having it all and always wanting more arrived as a favourite with no props, no fancy tricks, and nothing but a man with his charisma in a room, but ultimately fell short surrounded by pyro, tricks, and props galore. In some ways, the finish actually fits the character arc of the song perfectly. In any case, Akilas in the long run will probably still be a winner because this has massively kickstarted his music career, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from him plenty of times in the future. Next is another winner, and that is Poland. That is Alicia Szemplinska and her team, not the broadcaster, who completely bungled the national final, and in turn had some hand in building the narrative that Alicia dramatically reversed in Eurovision week. I wrote this off and said it had no chance of qualifying for the final. I have made my opinion on this song very clear. The general, though not universal consensus was that it wasn't bound for anywhere but a non-qualification. I would say that Alicia didn't get the memo, but I actually very much suspect that she did, and it fueled her even more. Poland came second in the semi-final, and in a genuinely organic situation, she probably would have won it. Vocally, this was off the charts good, and Alicia might have delivered the best pure vocal performance of anyone this year. When it comes to belting the big notes, there are precious few others who were able to get on this level. What really struck me watching watching it back though is the amount of emotion that comes across. You can practically feel her waving a middle finger in the face of her doubters during this performance. The longer it went on, the more her presence grew and grew on stage. And the extraordinary technical difficulty of the final section will have definitely hauled in a huge number of points. This was never going to have huge public appeal in the final, and in turn it didn't do great on that side. But simultaneously, Poland's infamous underperformance streak with the juries has not only been broken but completely smashed. Alicia was right amongst it with the pre-show jury favourites all along. She got more 12 points than any of them, with only Bulgaria scoring as many 12s as she did. Let this be a lesson to me and to many others. Never write anyone off. A good enough performance can see things like this happen. Secondly, never take your opinions from armchair experts and opinion havers like myself, because I did not see this one coming at all. I'm very happy to have been so conclusively proven wrong and surprised in this way. It's one of the joys of the contest, and I'd happily have this happen another 100 times. Time for the final and, in my opinion, biggest loser, and that for this year is Israel, who have huffed and puffed at Eurovision for 3 years now, repeatedly mobilized their support base to vote in a way that exploits the contest's systems, and thrown extraordinary, eye-watering sums of money at performances with giant props and literal millions of dollars in advertising, only to fail to win again. This time to a country whose entire participation cost less than 20% of what they spent on advertising alone last year. The house has not been blown down, and Israel has not managed to drag the contest to Tel Aviv and, simultaneously, to reputational and financial oblivion. This year, many of the trends we've seen since 2024 played out again, and Israel was allowed to participate in the contest. That was despite 5 countries withdrawing, such was the moral and ethical crisis that comes with keeping them in the frame. Israel derives a political value just from participating, and keeping them from winning is not enough. However, the narrative dramatically shifted, in my opinion, this year. It is now common knowledge amongst the audience that Israel's televote comes about in a way that most people do not see as legitimate. Rather, it's the result of a mobilization of political support. You can see this in the consistency of where points have come from over the last few years, and literally laid out in black and white in the emails sent by pro-Israel advocacy organizations to their memberships, framing the contest as a political struggle from which Israel stands to gain. This has gained such a prominence in public discourse now that it was subject to a long-form New York Times investigation, and that investigation revealed an example in Spain of the totally disproportionate vote share that Israel has been receiving. In addition to that, Israel did not win the public vote this year. They were beaten by both Romania and Bulgaria. I went over this result in detail last week and talked about how it suggests that new security measures and voting rules have massively reduced the effectiveness of Israel's campaign. But the bigger headline is that we have been spared another year of the most migraine-inducing nonsense that this contest can produce. People claiming that Israel is the people's champion and that a silent majority in Europe still supports the Israeli government and its actions. The falling but still disproportionate vote share and the much wider awareness of this campaign combined to produce a very important effect. It massively undercuts the use of this contest as a political tool. Being seen as a cheat in a competition like Eurovision is a stain that takes years and years to rub off. What Israel has done is ensure that nobody will look at any score they receive as being legitimate for very many years to come. Their presence in the contest is as harmful as ever, but for the first time since 2023, you could probably reasonably make the argument that this year was not a propaganda victory for them. That makes them this year's biggest losers. Finally, we have the contest's biggest winner of the year, and that's the actual winner, Bulgaria, obviously, but also the contest on a musical level. Eurovision has been crying out for a winner with a higher commercial relevance for some time. That's not a slight against Nemo or JJ, but we needed something to remind the music industry at large that this contest can deliver serious pop music quality to the mainstream across Europe, even at a time where its reputation and brand is kind of in the gutter. Dara has delivered that, because this song has gone down exceptionally well and has been topping charts all over the continent, including in massive and commercially critical markets such as Germany. By the way, the German public's 12 points isn't even the top 100. Can you guess what country that is? This changes the equation for labels in Europe's smaller and mid-level markets when considering whether to support their artists into participating. If you deliver a cutting-edge package of genuinely world-class standard, as Dara did, no matter where you are from, you can end up with a massive hit all over Europe. In the process, you can secure that artist's financial future for some time. It demonstrates a possible outcome in which everybody wins, and it means that hopefully next year, success will breed success, more bigger names will come into the competition, and that that in turn can only be good for it. The more hits it produces and the more money flows through to the artists and underlying delegations that produce this thing, the better the quality of work that will come into the competition. We saw this as a consistent trend through the 2010s and 2020s, and it's only in the last couple of years where that success has wobbled for obvious reasons. Hopefully, this year will be the start of a reversal in that trend. Of course, the biggest winner is Dara herself, though. She took a song which nobody fancied to get this high, and if anyone tells you they saw a winner potential in this after the national final, they are 99.9% telling porkies. And then through prudent and not excessive financial backing, the right staging and choreo team, and through her own ridiculous talent and stage presence, she transformed it into a performance that would have been fit for any stage on any show anywhere in the world. The audience recognized brilliance when they saw it, and they recognized that there was one entry that stood head and shoulders above the rest. That was this one. This victory didn't simply fall into Bulgaria's lap. Dara went out, performed the hell out of this song, and won on merit. With that, we're done for this week, and thank you so much for watching as always. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. As a side note, sorry I'm so sweaty, it's 33 degrees outside and I live in Britain, so I'm boiling to death. I'll be back again next week reviewing my very worst takes from throughout the season, some only slightly stinky and some being complete howlers. For now, take care and I'll see you again very soon.